very much for the presentation. And I had a question, because when you're talking with the owner, with your proposal, you're asking him, hey, I'm going to increase your budget on the early stages of the project with a promise of future savings. And how's that the owner says, why are you saying these? Why don't you manage well the project? And how do you convince the owner on that and tell him, hey, every project has a 40% increase in budget, and well, why did you budget that way? Or did you do your work? And how you handle that with the owner, and you convince him, and you just are able to, just without any previous experience.
Well, so I can tell you, as for the past 15 years, I've been the senior executive responsible for delivering these projects, right, as the owner. So I'm responsible for the bucket of money. So I argue that it's not an increased cost at all. It's a cost shift. Okay, so the instant the electrical contractor gets a set of drawings, he has to study those drawings and start to understand those drawings and do what those drawings tell him and respond back to the engineer that he understands those drawings. So that work is embedded into those costs. Now, I argue that so go back to the McClaney curve, right? As the project is further developed, change costs significantly more. So when the electrical contractor tells me that's not going to work, but the design is finished, now I have to go back and redesign, and now I'm stuck with this electrical contractor who has the right to price things however he wants. In some respects, I mean, I have some visibility into what's going on, but now I'm at risk for paying premiums for the change work, right? So I'm going to tell my CFO that, listen, I want to build in this predictability at the beginning of the program. Now, I'm not going to ask industry professionals to come into my programs and offer me free advice, which is not uncommon in the industry, right? General contractors will go out to the industry and tell me what you think, what's your opinion of these programs? No, sorry, I can't pay you. Well, then, you know, you get what you pay for. So I say no. Nobody is going to come on my job and offer me any advice or do any work for me for free. You're coming for a payment. Now, oftentimes I get, okay, I'll do it for $10,000 or something, and the hours may overrun that, but at least they got some compensation for that work. We now, as we contract though, we basically say, okay, I'm choosing you at the very early stages before you can price the work. I ask you for an opinion based on maybe your historical cost understanding of the program, but it's your job to lose, right? If you come to me 3/4 of the way through the design and say, oh, my estimates were wrong and now I need another $1 million, I'm going to be pretty skeptical, right, about what's going on there, and I have to do some real research there. So at the end of the day, I mean, it really does, my CFO ends up having to trust me, and just like was asked here before, well, let me show you. Let me show you the last 26 projects we've delivered this way, and look at these results. And as Will mentioned, you know, facts aren't always enough to prove what's right or wrong. And I have had those arguments with the CFOs of the organization. And how do I know that your efforts are what's driving these costs down? Well, when I historically deliver 25 projects, and the cost of the first one was 200, and the 20th one is 150, what happened, right? Are there just all of these circumstances that made me get lucky finally? You know, but I can show you even a trajectory down. So it's, again, I'm going to go back to that resilience, right? You got to be willing to fight that fight, and you're going to get. Every time we bring these new concepts to somebody, I'm going to tell you that can't be done in our industry. It can't be done in our business. It can't be done in this locale. We get all that every time, every single time, and we have to convince people. We have to just assume we're going to get that, and we have, even in this trip, right? Okay, do you want to consider it or not? You know, if you don't, well, if you wasted your day. If you do, well, let's talk about what we can try. So it is experimentation. There's a fair amount of experimentation to get you to learn, but then there's experimentation to drive innovation, right? And so we have to allow that to. Sorry if I overran your question. Hopefully I got
Yeah.
you the answer.
No,
you needed.
definitely. And how to take into account the cultural factors? Because Americans are pretty open, pretty straightforward, and Chileans, the first word you hear from a Chilean is yes. Second word, but. And, and the but is a very big no-no. And if you're asking commitment and stuff like that, how you handle that culture? Have you worked with other cultures? And
Well, ultimately, we ask for a yes if,
Yes, that's exactly what I would have
as
said.
opposed to a yes but or a no, right? No is unacceptable. Yes if. If I do what for you, you can make that happen. And then they have to come up with those conditions.
Well, was the same question, but I think that in Chile our problem is the culture. Change the culture, okay, for practice this type of content. What was your experience respect the change the culture for practice this type of contract?
Yeah, so one of the things I would say is as we led up to this, we met with owners, we met with lawyers, we met every week with I'll say Luis and others that were getting us ready to be here. And every group that would come on would say, well, here's what's different about what we do in Chile, or here's what's different about our culture, or here's the difference about our law. And every time we get to the end of the conversation, it's like, that is your perspective, and we've heard this in the United States. Right? In other words, now it doesn't mean that there aren't differences, but the culture in the construction industry in the United States is yes, but. It's skepticism by owners that you're just pulling the wool over my eyes again. You know, this is just another way of trying to get more money from me. The distrust is like rampant. It's like when you show somebody, here's my books, they say, but show me the real books. So you have to, our view, okay, is this needs to start with building personal relationships. So that first thing I described in the 5 big ideas was increased relatedness. It's much more difficult to distrust somebody who's your friend. It's much easier if you think about this, and I don't think we use the graphics today of transactional versus relational, but you have to build the relationship first so that people will understand. And part of that is being vulnerable and really, one of the things we have people do is talk about how do you really make your money. There are owners who believed in the United States that when a general contractor was telling them that their fee was 2%, that the job profit that they needed to earn on the job was 2%. That's absolutely fantasy. You can't stay in business for 2% on volume. You would go out of business. Your overhead is more than that. So, but owners competed us based on that fee. It's like, well, you didn't have a low fee, so you're not going to get the work. It's like, okay, then we got a high profit, all sorts of other
Makes
places.
them great at hiding money. Yeah.
Because you only want to see a 2% fee, and I got to do that because Turner's going to do that, DPR's going to do that, everybody. So we'll all go figure out different places to hide our money. So, and nobody wants to go to the owner and say, well, here's how much I'm really making, because I don't trust that he's going to say, well, then I don't want to work with you because you're obviously off the... It's like, you can go to the industry standard, there's organizations in the United States that capture the data from general contractor. We're all trying to have the same business. There's some of them, like Fluor and others, that are public companies. You can see what they make, and it's like, but that's not the fee. So you have to think about how can I build relationships that we can actually begin to have an honest conversation about how we want to work together. Because until you can do that, you could change the contract and you will have that zigzag project. Because the contract will say one thing and the way people are behaving is all the same old ways because you haven't really changed the people. You've changed the paper, but you haven't changed the people. And that's why, again, we come back to this phrase transformation because you use a great thing. It's got to start with the person who wants to make the change. They have to change themselves and then work on changing somebody else. It's like, and it really is, I talked to Bevan Mace, maybe you'll recognize him. he talks about how we're gonna change the industry. I said, Bevan, we change the industry one person at a time. It's like hand-to-hand combat. It's mind-to-mind combat, but it's basically one person at a time. And then they go change the mind of one more person, and it expands out exponentially, but it really is changing the way we think about ourselves and the way we relate with others in our industry. I hope that helped.
¿Alguna otra pregunta?
Sí, bueno, primero que todo, yo no tengo buen inglés para hablar, así que lo voy a hacer en español, pero me voy a ayudar el Luis. Bueno, yo trabajo en una universidad pública y tengo una consulta con respecto a la implementación de este sistema en países con una férrea normativa pública, ya en donde de alguna forma se sataniza el contacto entre el proveedor y el mandante y el dueño. Entonces es muy complejo lograr una comunicación entre proveedores y llegar a implementar algo como lo que se está planteando. ¿Cómo han visto esta experiencia en países de este tipo o en situaciones de este tipo?
He works for a public university, so he's only representative, and he's concerned about how this type of agreement works in countries where they have a very tight normative for the relationship between owners and contractors, where it's not easy for them to get close.
First off, I think you have to be bold as a leader, okay? There's nothing in any of those contracts that says you can't partner with people, okay? You can practice, you saw yesterday, the multitude of lean practices, right, that we had on those charts without changing any contracts, purely by befriending all those others on your team, one at a time. Let's try this, and so it's like a wave, right? It starts off small and it grows bigger as you change people's mind. So we call it celebrating small wins. You know, let's show that this is going to make your work easier. Who doesn't want their work to be easier? And by virtue of doing that, it can be a snail's pace. It can be very slow, but you got to start. You got to start there, change the way people are thinking about that thing, and then try to get more people involved in those change methods. So apply one thing, then the next thing, then the next thing, and work your way up that curve.
Yeah, I'll offer that so without the form of agreement, over the course of the last 20 years, many governmental entities, including the one that Bill described working for, have worked towards, I'll call it methods. So many of the things you saw are lean methods, and the way we behave when we're together. So nothing tells you how you have to behave when you're in a meeting to try to resolve an issue or to solve a problem. And so some of it is really just how we're going to behave and treat each other. We may still need to negotiate and come to a resolution, but we don't have to treat each other as enemies. We can treat each other as colleagues. We can be professional, we can be respectful, we can bring some of these ideas forward. And then, again, the methods that we're going to use, we often find that people can agree on this. So in the United States, the Federal General Services Administration, which is responsible for delivering most of the public buildings in the United States, has brought these ideas. They don't change their contracts, but they bring these ideas. Did you ever meet Craig Unger?
No.
So Craig Unger used to be the director of the Department of Prisons in the Bureau of Prisons in the United States. He brought ideas like this into construction of prison facilities in the United States. So when you say it takes somebody bold, it just takes somebody who says, I may be limited in what I can do, but within those limits, I'm going to do absolutely as much as I can. And we have an expression that we use in the United States, we're going to proceed till apprehended. Okay, we're going to do as much as we can until somebody says you can't do that. Rather than ask for permission, we're just going to start doing things until somebody says that's not permitted. So that's just that bold mindset that Bill's talking about is is go make small strides towards what better might look like. You may not be able to get to best, but we can certainly make it better.
Thank you.
Hello. First, I wanted to thank you both for your generosity and all the knowledge and experience that you've shared with all of us. My question, it's really not a question, I would just like to hear your thoughts about the feasibility of implementing some of these concepts in smaller projects, or maybe in a large project but in a smaller increment, as a way to start.
Tell us what you, when you say a smaller project, give us an idea what a smaller project.
I'm thinking mostly in timeline, something that is just a year or 2 years.
Oh, sure.
You can show some results.
Yes. You go first.
So if you go back in your mind to the 5 curves I showed from my Disney experience, it's exactly what I did. So we started with these mega projects, right? These billion-dollar projects. The other 4 charts on there, while I didn't describe exactly what they were all 1.5-year projects that were somewhere between 20 and 70 or 80 million dollars. So trying to do proof of concept. Now, you can't prove every concept on a project that small, but you can certainly prove a chunk of those. And then I did that purposefully to give organizational learning. So we talk about a self-journey, right? I want to learn how to do some things in a more effective manner. We talk about learning on a project. What can you teach on a project? Well, a long project you can teach a lot in step functions, right? But on a small project you can teach a few things and do those few things very well. Then those people may very likely go to another project or spread out on your team and go to different projects and be able to teach those people from true experience. So it's a way of building capability within your organization. So it's really a matter of how much do I take on with this given project. And I can tell you there's projects with different natures of the work that can be better utilizing certain traits than others, certain tools, lean tools than others. And so you just have a dialogue with your team. What are the 5 things we're going to try on this project that seem to make sense for us to learn and try? And I've done it on projects as small as a month. We're going to do these 3 things because the most important aspect of this project is collaboration and getting the teamwork together. And we shut down hospital beds, right? And we want to get them back up as fast as we can. How can we work together better to get them to the finish line faster? So you can't do everything, but you can certainly try pieces. And over time, your capabilities are broadened.
You know, I'll just say, even the Sutter Health program that we talked about, the initial pilot projects were all small projects. And each of them had an assigned set of things we want to learn. We did know that we wanted to apply the last planner system to all of our projects. And the learning there is, if you create reliability on your projects, it'll provide the capacity for your people to learn new things, because they're not fighting the fires from yesterday's failures. They're instead having enough reliability that they can use that capacity now to do something new. If you don't create that capacity, they have no capacity to learn. So we also did that. The first IFOA project that Sutter did was a $20 million medical office building, which for them was a small, at least as a greenfield, it was a very small project. It only lasted like 18 months. And again, it was with companies that they knew they were going to do bigger projects with. So let's go invest in this team and learn together. And it was many of those same companies that then moved to that billion-dollar project. So, like Bill said, it's like, yes, pick a project, pick some things that you want a team to get good at, help them get good at that. When they get good at that, they may even be during that year-long window. It's like, okay, they're good at these things now, we can add some more things on for that team, because we do find that teams that start to experience improvement become hungry for more.
And build a learning culture within your team.
La última pregunta,
my name is Camilo, and I'm working in a forest company, industry company. So I'm looking for the lifetime of the project. I'm looking also your main question, like why, what, and how, no? And when I follow that during the lifetime, at the beginning you're trying to understand what are you need to resolve, right? And when you have some certainty, you start to make the what, and when you have some certainty, you're starting to talk about the how. Normally, during this lifetime, you have different milestones when you start to make normal contracts, like design contracts, construction contracts. So now you are telling us that you can produce one contract along all the lifetime. So how you fix this uncertainty during this lifetime in the contract, because you have some deliverables that you make to incorporate in the contracts that are not fixing along this lifetime. So how do you manage these definitions along the lifetime? The people that are going to be involved, you need to wait sometimes to involve other people to make decisions, because it's not fixed, the why and the what and how at the same time.
So you don't necessarily need everybody that's going to be involved in the project on the first day. Okay, so you also don't need everybody, assuming you're going to use a multi-party integrated form of agreement with one contract, you don't need every trade to sign that contract. So you can have 5 people, 7 people, or more, but you don't need all the people all at the time. There are certain scopes of work that are pretty small and don't impact the entirety of a program. So if you're looking in here, movable partitions are a very special type of installation. Plumbing dividers in their bigger bathrooms are usually a sole source or a small sourced contract. All of those can be done transactionally. We try to have 70% of the influential people up on the project signing to one agreement. So those are the people with the bigger scopes, so it ends up being usually 7 or 8 people sign that contract early, because they have the most influence on the decision making at the beginning that influence the outcome of the cost at the end of the job. So no, you don't know, for instance, what color the paint is going to be at the beginning of the program, so you don't need the painter to be involved in the beginning of the program. There may come a point when you want to involve that painter. There should come a point when you want to involve that. You can create what contractually would be called a joining agreement. You join the contract that's already in place. They don't have the right to renegotiate the contract at that point, the terms and conditions at least. So they can join that, or they can be hired as a traditional lump sum contract. So you may end up with multiple contract types. Well, you will end up with multiple contract types over the term of the contract that may need to be managed separately. In fact, I wrote a paper about that 10 years ago that talks about how the project manager has to in some ways be schizophrenic in how he thinks about implementing the contracts, because he's got partners over here, and behavioral partners over here and transactional partners over here. So which are you, and how do I behave when I'm interacting with you? And that's, so it's never going to be, well, I shouldn't say never, but it's rare that everybody would sign the same contract. Many people, their contract size just doesn't warrant that inclusiveness. Does that answer your question?
Let me give it a try here too. I brought up some other documents. So at the beginning we talked about this idea of project validation. And the validation is really an effort at the beginning of the job, in the first 3 to 6 months of the job, to bring that whole team together, to listen and develop with the owner what the why is, why do you need to build something, and for the what and how teams to work together to say, this is collectively the solution that we would offer you, that we think will meet your business need. but we don't have deliverables. The deliverables are this book that is the validation study, and so I want to challenge this idea of traditional deliverables. We think traditional deliverables, especially if they're intermediate deliverables, are waste. We should get rid of them. Okay? What we want a team to do in validation is to think, how can they create that level of cost certainty where they're already 80% done with construction, with that level of design documentation, which is the deliverables. And what we have concluded is that this is really the framework that needs to happen, that the understanding of the what and the how that the constructor has, and the what and the how that the designer has, even in these early phases, have to be united. Okay? And so, and then you saw that curve of common understanding where they climb that curve together really early in the validation phase, and then they maintain it as they develop additional levels of detail, because it's not like we have all the details figured out in that first 6 months, but we have all the answers. It's like I described it yesterday. We take the estimator and say, in order to have a 98% confidence in the number that you're going to provide without documents, what questions do you need answered? What information do you need? And what we do is we gather all that information rather than spending the effort to document it in construction, issue for construction documents. We just make notes, we do sketches, we do whatever we need to do that we can put back in that binder. So we're all confirmed on what we're going to do that will meet the owner's needs. Because when the owner says yes, if you deliver me that, within that amount of money and that amount of time, let's go, we don't ever want to revisit that. If the owner decides later, I need to add additional floor, that's fine, that's change. But the decisions that we finalized in that validation study on how we're going to solve the owner's problem, we're fixed on that. And I'll just say that in our most advanced IPD projects, that's the moment that we set the target price. So at the same time that we're demonstrating, so at FEL3, I don't know whether you're at the engineering side or the building side, but at FEL3 we're fixing the price before we've moved into FEL4 for design. Because we're so confident that we have an agreement among the owner, the designer, and the constructor that we know what we're going to build, that we feel confident in the pricing that we can assign to that.
Okay. I want to thank you for being here and for sharing with this audience where we have many owners representatives here. So it's a different audience than we had before. Y para quienes han asistido hoy día, les comunico que si les interesa seguir, intentar implementar esto, nosotros estamos precisamente tratando de promoverlo con Harrison Mesa, con Patricio Gaona. Hemos estado envueltos en este tipo de proyectos por muchos años, tratando de aprender, tratando de documentar y ver cómo apoyarlo, ¿no? Todavía no hemos tenido demasiado éxito en que alguna empresa lo tome totalmente, pero sí parcialmente, ¿no? Como ellos contaban. Así que cuenten con nuestro apoyo si es que quieren partir con esta, yo creo que, oportunidad que hay aquí. Así que gracias por asistir también a todos. Un aplauso.